I just got finished with the casting of Frank Stone, the latest horror game from British developer Supermassive Games, their previous works of which consist of 2015's Until Dawn, 2022's The Quarry, and also their Dark Pictures Anthology series. So they specialise in a very specific genre of these cinematic adventure games centred around various horror archetypes. We've had werewolves, we've had Native American curses, we've had ghost ships, and here with the casting of Frank Stone we have a unique tale that combines the trope of an 80s serial killer with otherworldly lore of the Dead by Daylight universe. Now, Dead by Daylight is an asymmetrical multiplayer game where 4 players control survivors who have to work together to escape a 5th player who takes control of one of numerous killers that will hunt the other players down. And when they do, they stick the survivors on hooks to which they'll be sacrificed to the entity. These claws spawn above them and take them out of the game. Now, Dead by Daylight doesn't contain any single-player components, and the lore surrounding the game's mythos is there, but it takes some digging to find it. Well, with the casting of Frank Stone, this is the first time we are getting a more narrative-focused spin-off from the Dead by Daylight universe, with the collaboration between Supermassive Games and Behaviour Interactive, the creators of Dead by Daylight. With this, Frank Stone is still your usual 5 to 6 hour cinematic adventure you would expect from Supermassive, but there is now many ties to Dead by Daylight, some subtle like finding Easter eggs off the beaten path, and some a little more in your face, like having to repair generators or press X at the right time during quick time events, just like you do in Dead by Daylight when controlling the survivors. The game even utilises many of the same sound effects. So as with all of Supermassive's previous projects, the story here is the heart of the game, and if you're not into lengthy cutscenes, quick time events, and choosing dialogue options, then the casting of Frank Stone is just not going to win you over. There are moments where you get to control many of the characters from a third-person perspective, exploring the corridors and short environments, finding items to read, collectibles to find, and even occasionally solving a small puzzle to access a further room or unlock a secret route. Although the puzzles aren't anything you'd find from like Silent Hill, there is no cryptic stuff here. These are as simple as looking for a key item and placing it in the lock, or at most you'll have to move a crate to climb onto and reach a new area. But for the most part, the levels are very linear, always moving you in a single direction, and if there occasionally does look like another route, then it's just to lead you to a collectible and then sends you right back to the main path. There isn't any Resident Evil mansion levels of exploration here, but nor did I really expect there to be from this developer. As I said, the narrative here is what's taken centre stage, and every moment of exploration is purposefully designed to keep that pace and the story beats always moving. If you've played like Until Dawn, then you know exactly what I mean. During the cutscenes, you are still in control with the occasional QuickTime event or a choice to make in a hurried amount of time, making sure that you are still holding onto your controller. For me, the narrative was enough to keep me hooked, and I was always full of questions and on the edge of my seat for the game's entire runtime. I am a sucker for a fun horror, and you really do need to be for a lot of Supermassive's projects. I wouldn't say it's the scariest game I've ever played, and not even the scariest game from Supermassive, and I know that will knock its legacy a little bit compared to the other games in their portfolio, but the twists, the set pieces, and the connections it builds with Dead by Daylight are what intrigued me the most. This doesn't play out like any generic horror narrative that I've at least seen or played before, and that's what keeps it feeling fresh and unique. And if you are coming from Dead by Daylight, and even some of Supermassive's previous games, there are a lot of Easter eggs to find here that are a nice welcome treat. Now, the casting of Frank Stone takes place across 3 different times: the 1960s, the 80s, and 2024. While the 60s is only covered in the opening chapter of the game, which sets the scene of the narrative, the rest of the game's chapters will bounce heavily between the events that play out in the 80s and the current day events in 2024. Without spoiling any of the game's twists, the main premise of the narrative involves a horror movie called Murder Mill, which was filmed by a group of teenage friends who are aspiring filmmakers. But when the movie was shown in the cinema, it sent the audience into a violent rage, and the movie was therefore destroyed and forgotten about, becoming an urban legend. So in the 80s, you're seeing the events unfold of when the teenagers decide to go shoot their film at an abandoned steel mill, which just so happens to be the site of the grisly 60s murders and the old workplace of serial killer Frank Stone. And in the present time, you control a girl called Madison, who has been invited to an eerie countryside manor house in the late evening. How the game ties the three time periods together and crafts this singular narrative is really clever, and it certainly is the main highlight of this game. It also means you have two slightly different styles of horror happening at the same time. The 80s part of the narrative is your retro slasher, with the suburban town that has a dark past and a group of naive friends which give off a Stranger Things kind of vibe. Then in the present times you have the large ominous mansion. Madison meets up with two other characters who were also invited to the house, and together you must investigate and find the host that has summoned you all there. When weaved together, it's really well paced, and I liked that the story wasn't just told in a linear manner. It made it feel different. And when the twists start unravelling, it's a great part of the experience to start piecing it all together, like, ooh, they're that person, and that's from the past, and I've seen that before, etc. Now, there are a lot of characters here, as with most of these types of games, and the choices you make will change your relationships and consequently alter some of the scenes and the dialogue within them. At any time, you can pause the game and look over your relationship changes, look at the collectibles that you've found, and the different choices that you have made. After completing the game, there's the cutting room mode you unlock in the main menu, almost like a scene select that lets you replay all of the chapters in the game to unlock new scenes, find any missed collectibles, and unlock the rest of the game's trophies. I do like this, it helps in seeing what you might have missed, and trust me, you will have missed a lot of the game on just your first playthrough. Whereas if no level select like this was included, it wouldn't be quite as tempting going for a second or even third run of the game. Some of the later chapters do have a lot of dialogue paths you can take, which will alter the scenes and end the game with various different survivors. Now, I feel to really do justice to the casting of Frank Stone, I have to talk about things that could spoil the game if you haven't played it yet yourself. So you can skip to this time on screen, which will send you past the spoilers and to my final verdict. So if you're still here, then spoilers ahead. So the casting of Frank Stone, to my surprise, turned out to be more of a time-bending, multiversal horror than a simple slasher. Before playing the game, I was a little uncertain how they would manage to tie it in with Dead by Daylight, because, it being just a multiplayer game. But wow, yeah, this game is all about Dead by Daylight, more so than even the story of Frank Stone. That's not a criticism either, as I do like the angle this game takes. So Frank Stone was a serial killer in the 60s time, but he was manipulated by a woman called Augustine Lieber, who is the host in the 2024 timeline. And essentially, she is a woman who travels across time, she serves the entity, the evil deity from the Dead by Daylight game, and in this she grooms Frank Stone into killing for her. But in the prologue, Frank Stone is killed by the police officer Sam Green, and so what appears later is Frank's spirit that is reborn as a twisted monster, just like the killer's scene in Dead by Daylight. The game even introduces a slight bit of action halfway through, which involves using a Super 8 camera to destroy the spirit of Frank Stone when he shows up. He never appears randomly like Mr. X or Nemesis from Resident Evil, only in scripted moments, which does take the fear factor away from his encounters, but it was still a change to actually be involved with some action. By the end of the game, the characters you've kept alive throughout turn up at the campfire just like the lobby screens in Dead by Daylight, doomed to be trapped in an endless cycle of being hunted and having to escape the killer, in which case this is Frank Stone. I did enjoy the ending, I think mainly because I've played Dead by Daylight and I knew exactly what it was referring to with the setup at the end. I liked how the entity was brought into it and the journey of Frank Stone being just a crazed killer of the 60s and seeing how he was turned into the creature at the end, waiting literally for the game of Dead by Daylight to begin. With Madison, in my game, even questioning why he's waiting to attack them. Well, because he's waiting for them to all join. It's a clever fourth wall break and it makes us feel kind of guilty because it's actually us choosing the characters and putting them through the torment by playing Dead by Daylight. And I like the angle this game takes. But the major issue is if you haven't played Dead by Daylight or know of that game's intricacies, which isn't going to be that uncommon seeing as how both games are so very different. I can't imagine everyone who plays the casting of Frank Stone will have come from Dead by Daylight, then the ending may feel a little unresolved and abrupt. My characters have survived a whole game of torment just to essentially be stuck in an endless loop of doom anyway. And from what I could find in the cutting room mode, there isn't any path that doesn't end up with our characters not arriving at the campfire. That's written into the game, that's just how the casting of Frank Stone ends. It also leaves me with still a lot of unanswered questions, like when the police officer Sam reappears in the 2024 time and Linda questions why he isn't much older, I assume she's referring to him being from an alternate time, but it's never confirmed, and the piece of the murder mill film reel that Linda has, she says that the scenes on it didn't play out that way, which again brings up the question, well, why isn't it the same if it's been in her possession this whole time? It's never elaborated on. Maybe there is an odd scene I missed, but there is still a lot of questions about the time displacement and the omniverse which is mentioned that doesn't ever get expanded upon and felt a little rushed. Now, I don't know how Supermassive Games works on the inside. I do know that they have a lot of staff, but they're working on a lot of projects at the moment. Between this, they also have Little Nightmares 3 coming up and their next Dark Pictures game, so I don't know if it's deadlines or being stretched too thin or possibly a little of both, but the casting of Frank Stone does feel a tad rushed in some areas, not just narratively though, but also technically. I did notice there was some screen stuttering at times, frequent texture pop-in during scene changes, and some lip-syncing issues which really felt rushed. It was never enough to completely pull me out of the game, but for the premium price, which is a little higher than their usual Dark Pictures entries, I was expecting it to be of a higher quality. Nevertheless, the game itself is a real stunner at times with some neat cinematography and use of colours and text, giving it a classic horror feel, and the character models for the most part all look really, really good. Well, it's time for my final verdict. The casting of Frank Stone is another solid entry in the portfolio of interactive horror dramas by Supermassive Games. It tells a fresh narrative, it's got some good twists, and each of the characters got enough screen time for them to be memorable. The acting is good, and the writing for the most part is compelling, outside of, a few cheesy lines which you kind of expect with the teenage horror setting. I enjoyed the pacing, and I liked the blending of Dead by Daylight's action with the style of Supermassive. While it is quite on the short side, the game offers a slight bit of replay value via the cutting room mode to revisit scenes and see more of what you might have missed without having to start the game from the very beginning. It is very linear with some simple puzzles and reuses many of the same locations throughout the course of the story, just revisiting them with different characters, which I guess does come across as a little padding. And there's the light technical issues, so maybe waiting for a patch to iron those out would be best. I did also feel that if you haven't played Dead by Daylight before, then a lot that the game is going to refer to in some of its collectibles and endgame moments may be a little lost on you. But that being said, I still recommend this game for those who are big fans of Supermassive Games or want something new to play over the autumn season. The game does feature a pass to control or co-op mode, so playing with friends is also a selling point of the game. I'm going to score the casting of Frank Stone a B for Bravo on my rating scale. A little rushed, but with a fun horror narrative, great ties to the Dead by Daylight universe, and a familiar, if linear, another entry in Supermassive Games' long list of horror adventures. Upcoming, Supermassive Games are working on a third entry of Bandai Namco's Little Nightmares series, and their fifth Dark Pictures game, Directive 8020, which looks to take a more sci-fi angle. In terms of Dead by Daylight, I'm sure the game itself will likely have an update that will bring Frank Stone to its ever-growing roster, and maybe even have some of the other characters like Madison, Linda and Chris show up too as survivors. For Don Critic, my next review will be on Astrobot, but I may have some others lined up in the near future too. Thank you all so much for watching. Let me know in the comments below what you think of the casting of Frank Stone, and tell me what your favourite game from Supermassive Games is. I'll catch you in the next one, and have a great day as always. Take care.